Hi, I'm Kathryn, and welcome back to our Espresso at Home series. In this lesson, we'll be going over some of what we've talked about in the context of actually preparing a shot. And we'll introduce another factor for espresso, and that is evenness. So, the grinding up of your coffee is where the shot starts in the morning, right? We've talked about how the grind setting will affect your espresso. Grinding finer will give you more surface area, which allows more extraction, and it also slows down the water flow rate through the shot, which increases contact time, which again increases extraction. So having a good grinder gives you smaller steps, since as you go finer, you're changing those two factors at once. And when you go coarser, vice versa. At the end of the last lesson, I mentioned distributing, which can assist with getting a good result from quite a fine grind, and it also improves overall extraction. Because ultimately, when you start getting really deep into espresso improvement, evenness will improve even more than reaching the perfect grind setting. And that is partially because at any given grind setting, you don't actually have all the exact same size grounds. Some grinders have this fancy setting where they kind of display a micron or a millimeter size when you set it, but that's a little misleading because not every particle is actually that exact size. Say you have one of these fancy grinders and it says that your setting is 0.6 millimeters. Some of your particles, hopefully most of your particles, will be close to 0.6, but some of them will be much bigger and some of them will be much smaller, like maybe 0.1 millimeters. If you're familiar with the bell curve, it's a little bit like that. For those of you saying, not exactly, you're right, it's not exactly, but it's a similar idea. The better the grinder, the more grinds will be very close to your target grind size. And the lower quality the grinder, the more spread out those grind sizes are going to be. When you have a lot of coarse grounds mixed in with finer grounds, what happens is that the water will actually travel around those coarse grounds faster, and they'll move through the fine grounds slower. This is one way that channeling happens. The other thing that can happen is that you get a lot of fines, and those fines are tiny grounds, much smaller than your target size. This does always happen, even with a good grinder, but a really good grinder will have few of them overall. And what happens with those fines is that they can get pushed down to the bottom of the basket and they can clog up the filter, causing the machine to choke up, and ultimately, usually causing more channeling. Unfortunately, the only way to improve your grind distribution is either improving your grinder. So if you have a really great grinder, but it's old, you could get some new burrs, or you could get your burrs sharpened, or you get a better grinder. If you have not purchased gear yet, I really recommend putting as much thought into your grinder as you do your espresso machine. So you have as even a grind as you can get with your gear. Can you tamp it and pull a good shot? Not just yet, because there's another distribution to consider, and that is the distribution of grounds in the portafilter itself. Now this is an area where you might actually be able to outshine your local coffee shop because you don't have the same constraints of time and volume to properly prep each individual shot as ideally as possible. So I mentioned clumping, which happens especially with very fine grind settings. You have your fine grounds, but they clump together and they act like a coarser ground. If you don't break up those clumps, you will again have portions of the bed that get more dense and less dense, and so you can get channeling. Now, one other cause for clumping is static electricity. And when you're single dosing at home, there's a really simple aid for that. You can get a little spray bottle and you can give your beans one little spritz. Or you can take something like a teaspoon, you can get it wet, measure your beans out into a little dish, give them a little stir. You don't want the beans to look wet after this. That will cause even more channeling, as well as it could corrode your burrs if you're introducing enough water that the burrs are actually getting wet. You really only want enough water to act as a little humidifier. The beans shouldn't look wet, there shouldn't be droplets left on your grinder. If you're seeing that, you've added too much water. Another way to help with clumping after grinding is to take something very thin and give the grounds a little stir in your portafilter. You can get something like a Weiss distribution tool, which you can buy, or you can kind of make. There are a couple ways to make it with pins. Or you can use a clean pin or a paper clip. I've just got a probe thermometer here because that's what I have here. Having some sort of distribution tool like that is nice because it is a bunch of needles to help get that done really fast. But like I said, you can do it with anything that's clean and thin. And you just want to spend a little longer stirring if you only have one. Now, let's go back to grinding. I've got a single dose of beans here. I'm gonna give them one little spritz. There we go. Then I'll grab the portafilter pop the beans over here. I'm actually gonna grind into this because having a separate receptacle can also help with breaking up clumps and redistributing it. Now I'm gonna go back to the portafilter. Remember how I mentioned that too much water in the grinder can cause clumping? It's true in the portafilter as well. So you really wanna make sure the portafilter is completely dry. Grab a clean towel, give it a good wipe. Even if you haven't been pulling shot after shot, like in a busy coffee shop, if you've had your portafilter warming on your group head, you might have some condensation. Just don't skip this step. So now I will go ahead and pour the grounds into the portafilter. This helps a little bit with breaking up the clumps itself, and I can also start distributing a little bit to make my job a little easier later. But there's another reason I want to distribute this better. You can look and you can see there's a little bit of a mound going on here. If you grind straight into the portafilter, you get this mountain. And if you just go ahead and tamp it, you actually create a section of the shot with different densities. I've got another little graph here. What this means is that water will move in and the center mountain is really dense and the outside has more space. So the water is going to move to the edges. It's going to find that path of least resistance. It'll travel all the way around the outside instead of going all the way evenly through the puck. So the first thing I'm going to do when I go back to my portafilter is I'll give it a little tap. I'll try to get it nice and even. And then I'm going to go ahead and take my distributor tool. I'll give it a little stir. Lance Hedrick has a video where he talks about planetary motion. You're doing the moon around the earth, which is then the earth around the sun, which I like space. So I'm gonna take that example, I like it. But you just really wanna stir these up nice and evenly, break all the clumps, and get it nice and even. Now I'm gonna go ahead and give this another little tap, try to get the bed even. And now we're actually ready to tamp. Now the purpose of tamping is somewhat debated. Some people really want to tamp as hard as possible. Some people say that your 20 or 30 pounds of pressure from tamping is pretty negligible compared to the 9 bar that's going to be applied from most machines. But you want to remove the space between all of these sort of fluffy grounds and create a bit of a gap between where the shower screen will be and the surface of your puck. Regardless, the most important thing about tamping is making sure you tamp evenly, right? Evenness is the whole theme of this lesson. You want to tamp levelly and you want to tamp evenly. Because if you tamp at an angle, you're again introducing areas that are more packed and areas that are less packed, and the surface of your puck is at an angle and water will flow that way, and then it'll find the path of least resistance and it will take it. You also don't want to be knocking the puck around a bunch after you tamp, because what you're probably doing is you're disrupting that puck and you're going to actually create a little gap all the way around this nice little nestled puck. There will be space for the water to go around the edges, which causes channeling. So, how to tamp levelly? There are a couple of different ways to tamp, but you need to have a good handle on the tamper first. I've heard it described as the way that you would hold a doorknob, or maybe the way you'd hold the Statue of Liberty's torch. I had a friend once who said you should be so balanced when you're holding this that you could stick a shot glass on top and actually spin it around without dropping the shot glass. I myself wouldn't use the shot glass because I'm a klutz and I would probably trip on nothing, and now I'd have a broken shot glass all over the floor. But the idea that your tamper should be really balanced in your hand is a great way to think about that. Now, you can kind of either lean over like this with your arm back. This is one that I've seen is apparently a little bit better on your shoulders because you're not putting your arm way out at an angle, but tamping at this angle might be hard to tamp levelly. So as a home barista, you might or might not have to worry too much about the ergonomics of tamping because you're probably not doing it 100 times a day, but it's something to consider. So there's also sort of the classic barista stance. The portafilter's flat on the counter. Hold your arm out like this. Elbows should be at a right angle, and you want to use your shoulder to tamp straight down. Like I said, I've heard recently that this is a little harder on your shoulder, so you want to make sure you can do this comfortably. If it's painful or uncomfortable, you might want to try the other method and practice to make sure you can tamp levelly. What you absolutely do not want to do is use your wrist like this. This is really hard on your wrist, and also it's really hard to tamp levelly. If you put your hand back like this, can you balance anything on this? No. Remember, we want it to be balanced. So, after tamping, we want to lift straight up, not disturbing the puck, not tapping. The grounds, if there are grounds left on the edge here, you can go ahead and give them like a wipe off, but they really don't matter that much. It's fine.
Okay.
So again, with a tamp, lighter press, wipe away any grounds on top, and then you're good to go. One more thing that can help with the overall evenness of a puck is Preinfusion. Not every home machine has this ability, and in fact, the one that I'm demoing on does not intrinsically. You'd have to buy a separate piece to get a Preinfusion. But if your machine has it, I highly recommend utilizing it. Preinfusion wets the espresso puck, but it doesn't apply the full pressure, which ideally allows the whole puck to wet more evenly before full extraction begins. This is also one of those things that we figured out that it helps. We figured it out through time and through experience, but we don't have an absolutely certain scientific explanation for why it helps. Like I said a couple videos ago, we're still learning all about espresso, and I find that really exciting. Anyways, Preinfusion helps with managing fines. One hypothesis on why is that when you get the puck wet without pressurizing the whole way, the grounds all sort of expand and they just kind of lock those fines in place, so they're not able to move to the bottom of the portafilter. This means you can grind finer without worrying about getting more fines that'll clog up that portafilter. The even wetting also means that as soon as pressure is applied, hopefully the whole puck starts extracting at about the same time and about the same rate, since the puck has had time to fill up with water. And another factor is that even wetting, especially if your machine has little jets where it kind of shoots into the bed, having the bed wet evenly means that when those jets start, they don't immediately blast away the dry grounds and form a channel. A good shower screen should help with that, but Preinfusion can help as well. Okay, you have all the prep now and you can pull your shot. Is it the most delicious shot you've ever tasted? It might be, but it's probably not just yet. In the next lesson, we will help you dial in everything that we've talked about thus far. You can find a link to that next video in the bio, and if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. You can also find other classes at sagebrushcoffee.com. Thanks again for watching. I'm Kathryn, and I hope you have a great day.